Thanks for bringing up this important topic and the, Senate Bill 27. Thank you, Senator Nolenberg, with Senate Bill 174, I believe it was, to go off and kind of take a fresh look at how can we best go off and look at accountability. And today I'm joined by Seth Maus with 5-Star Life, and we've had a lot of discussions from a lot of experts in education, and I was going to try to set things off at the beginning here to kind of do a kind of a refresher. Some of the points that I've heard as a member of our committee, some of the key takeaways, if you will, from sitting through the committee hearings to date, and maybe serve it as a mild checkpoint, if you will, on where we're going. And then I'm going to kind of highlight where I think Seth and his organization, 5-Star Life, fits into the discussions around what the ultimate solution is. So just want to start off, if I could, by going over kind of some of the key requirements. What I've heard from a lot of the folks who've testified to date, a lot of them are some of the school districts that are impacted, some of them are educators, some of them are education experts, some of them are members of our own school reform office. And what I've heard, kind of the key words coming out of this, is any requirement we have for a good accountability framework has got to have some sort of flexibility associated with it. It's got to have some choice, local control, sustainability. I heard funding matched to need, stability, low administrative burden, clear expectation management, global performance, and student engagement. And one of the most important ones when it came to turning around schools, I think, was that student engagement piece. And that's where I think you're going to see some very good, a very good offering here by Seth at 5-Star Life, because his background is, just so you know, one of the areas I think he's going to be talking to us about, not only are they in a couple schools here in the state of Michigan, but one of their biggest challenges was, you guys may recall, Hurricane Katrina. And there's a lot of students, a lot of families displaced out of Louisiana that went to Houston, and in one school district in particular around Houston, and they had a lot of trouble getting everybody on the same page and focused on learning, because there's a lot of upheaval, as you might imagine, in the lives of these families. And there's a lot of upheaval in the lives of a lot of the kids right now, especially in context of what we've heard coming out of the school reform office, where people have a lot of uncertainty. They are able to take that environment, turn it around, and get the kids back focused on learning again. So you're going to hear a little bit about that. So here's some of the key requirements that I've heard, and where I think 5-Star Life fits in significantly here is the concept of student engagement, and we'll hear about that in a little bit. I also want to talk a little bit about, if we're talking about hierarchy, you probably remember some of my questions on all the folks that have come up here. I said, all right, if we're going to put in an accountability framework, where does it make sense to put that accountability framework? Is it something that we should listen to what the federal government has to say and have them put together all the accountability guidelines that we need to have in place? Is it something where they're going to tell the local schools what's best for them to do in their school district? Should that happen at the state level? Should that happen at the ISD level, all the way down to the last three here, which is teachers, parents, and students? And the testimony that really resonated in my head was the fact that, all right, you may use some of the federal or state or even ISD organizations to highlight when there is a problem, but if you really want to turn around that school district, it all comes down to the ones that have been proven to work and turn things around have happened. They've impacted the teachers, parents, and students. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Seth, because he's talking about a methodology that goes right to the heart of turning around a school and turning around kids and getting them interested in learning again so that teachers can teach.
First, let me welcome Seth, because Seth is a resident of our district from Pigeon, if I'm correct on that.
Well, I was raised there.
Raised there, okay.
Pigeon, Michigan.
Good enough for this committee. Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you very much. And make this switch here so you guys can follow along.
Seth, before you jump in, Senator Nolenberg has a comment or question.
Just a quick question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator. Can you, the overhead piece, can you kind of walk through that for me real quick so I understand where you're coming from on that?
Yeah, when I'm talking about overhead on that, so if you're going to go off and try to monitor what's going on in an individual classroom inside of Michigan from DC, you're going to need a lot of data. You're going to need a lot of information. You're probably going to need a lot of testing. You're going to need a lot of reporting. So the overhead is significantly higher. If you're closer to the ground, you already know what happens on a day-to-day basis inside that school. I don't need 5-volume report on student performance or what's going on with the demographics of or what are the key issues that are being faced from a social perspective inside of that. I know what they are. I live it every single day. So that's the intent of the overhead. It's the higher up you get into government where you're trying to identify or control or manage what's happening at the local level, well, you need more data in order to go off and do that. It kind of makes sense. I mean, if you're gonna monitor what's going on with your kids right now, I mean, it's a lot more. There's a lot more intrusive. You have to be much more intrusive than if you were there right there with them and actually living a day in the life with the people that are most affected by the policy. Does that make sense?
So it's not salaries and benefits, it's just really paperwork and.
Yeah, it's administrative burden. Think of it in that context.
Okay, so
Yep.
I just want to clarify that that's what you meant. Thank you.
Yeah, so you need more exams, all that kind of stuff, and, yep.
Well, thank you. I want to back up just a little bit and explain, 5-Star Life is new to most of you, I'm sure. So just a little history. We really started our organization 11 years ago, and it was driven by data. And there's a stat I'm going to put up there. 7,000 students drop out of school in this country every single day. So just an illustration, most people don't really understand and grasp the significance of that. So you put a student in a desk, you stack one on top of another until you reach the height of the Empire State Building. Now do that 12 times. Every single school day in America, that's how many students are dropping out. Condoleezza Rice says, the crisis we face in public education is a threat to the very core of who we are as a nation. It's the civil rights movement today. Totally agree with that. A colleague of mine had an opportunity to hear Kondo give a keynote address, and she said something that really was profound. She said, we are in the middle right now, not in 10 years or 15 years, but we're currently in the middle of creating a two-class society, the educated and the uneducated. And when I heard that, it just totally made sense, because when you turn on the news, when you are out in the community, that's what you feel. You feel this nation, this community that's being divided in two. And when we wonder where it starts in that school desk. When you have a nation that doesn't believe in education, and when you get down to the ground floor and you talk to teachers and principals, that is the biggest fight, especially in low-performing schools that they're fighting. It is, why am I here? What is the value of me being here? And so what we decided to do was we decided to research and address this problem and say, where does it start? What does the data say? And we've got to be able to come up with some solutions rather than blaming educators and politicians and parents. Let's find a solution. And so that's what we did. And it took us a few years, but what research found, we saw 80%, this is data, 80% of first-time drug, alcohol, and tobacco use takes place between age 10 and 14. That's middle school. 80% of the time they're experimenting is between 3 and 6. That's after school. 85% of all juvenile crime takes place between 2 and 7, again, after school. All the research we really drilled down and saw pointed to middle school and after school being this huge sieve that we're losing students. And we began to talk to high school principals and say, look, you've got this dropout issue, students are dropping out their freshman or sophomore year. And they said, yeah, but students don't just wake up one day and decide, it's February 28th, today's my day to drop out. All of them, every high school principal will tell you, they may drop out their freshman or sophomore year, but they check out back in middle school. Poor choices, wrong friendships, lack of family support. They don't understand why they're sitting in the seat. They don't connect the dots between why education will get them to where they want to be, because they're not even thinking about that. That's where culture and society is. So we looked at all that data and said, we're going to build our organization and fill some of these gaps, middle school, after school. So we started with after-school programs, and it took us a few years, but we developed 5 key areas over the course of about 3 years. The very first year, we were working with a group of students, and we saw students come in, and by the time the beginning of November hits, they get their midterm report, and they realize I'm failing several classes, or at a minimum, struggling in many classes. And you'd watch the morale, you'd watch their body language just fade, and that's where they stayed the rest of the year. Because in their minds, what they told us was, my mom wasn't good in school, my grandma wasn't good in school, I'm not going to be good in school. So why try? This is a waste of my time. This is as good as I can do. The next year, we put in our contract to schools, we said, we need grade reports every week. And so we started putting that in our contract, and we asked students the very first week of the program a very simple question, but very powerful question. Here's your grades today, week 1 of the program. Where do you want to be in 8 weeks? Students looked at us like deer in a headlight. Like, why are you asking me that? I can choose where my grades can go? Absolutely. We watched struggling students all of a sudden begin to set their own goals. When they had the opportunity to think about it, all of them wanted to be, hey, can I get all C's? They almost asked the question, well, sure, we'll give you the tools. So we have students going from F's to D's to C's to B's, some going to A's. From that point on, very consistently, our organization, the students in our programs have, 70% or more have raised their GPA or maintained a 3.0 or above. So academically, we're holding them accountable. So you see the first point there, academic support. Second thing was workforce readiness. I won't get into a whole lot of that, but students would graduate from our middle school programs, come back in high school, we'd offer workshops and training for them. Mentoring was a huge component, bringing in volunteers from the community that, people change lives. Programs are good, but people change lives. So mentors, coaches, to hold them accountable. Character education, which I'm going to spend more time talking about, our 5 core values and our proprietary curriculum we created. And then the fifth one is experiential learning. We acquired a 300-acre piece of property where it's one thing to talk about the value of courage, in a classroom with a student. It's another thing when you get them on a 35-foot tall climbing wall or ropes course, and all of a sudden, this idea of courage gets really real, and the idea of setting goals and having dreams and writing them down on a paper, which it's a big deal to get some of our students, just to dream, just to think beyond today. That's a huge step. But once you get it on paper, guess what? When you get out in the real world, there's this thing called adversity and conflict, all kinds of trouble. Well, on the ropes course, they get to experience that because they get up there and they say, oh, I want to go to this zip line over here that's 30 feet away. But to get there, they've got to pass through like 12 Burma loops, and there's fear, and there's crying, and there's swearing, and there's the whole thing that goes on. But at the end of the day, their coach is pushing them, and something powerful happens. They realize, I can either give up or I can keep going. And they apply that back to their academics, back to their situation with teachers they don't connect with, back to their home lives. And all of a sudden, something that's just a value that you can talk about becomes an experience they understand. They say, wow, if I can apply this to my life, what else can I overcome? What else have I checked out on? So those are the 5 key areas we really built our organization on. And we're now, fast forward, about 5 years into our organization. We've gotten a grant to really hire a clinical psychologist to track the impact over time on the students in our program. And they found over a 3-year period, the longer students were in our program, the higher their grades rose, the less behavior problems they had in the school, and the better the school attendance was. So we knew, okay, we're on to something. Match that with the academic data we're getting. This is working. So we then started to look at, and we were based out of northern Indiana, southern Michigan. And we were looking at, okay, this works in suburban areas, it works in rural areas. Will it work in a large urban population? And we had some connections with some folks in Houston, began to talk to superintendents, and we landed with the A-Leaf School District, which Senator Colbeck referred to. It's where a lot of the displaced folks from Katrina landed. One of the most diverse school districts in the nation, 90 different dialects, just about 70, actually 90 different nationalities, about 70 different dialects spoken. So extremely diverse. On the way to their school, you'll see prostitutes around the corner, probably a half a dozen every time I go to visit that school. Bullet holes in the walls of the school, lots of gangs. So we tested and piloted our program in Houston, and the data that came back was very similar, even better than when we started. And so for the last few years, we've been building and growing and adding schools in Texas. As we looked at creating a model, because the very beginning point, our goal was to create a model. We wanted to have massive change on schools and communities. And we saw, okay, we've got great data points in behavior, discipline, academics. There was one data point we weren't satisfied with. We created a metric for our character curriculum, which how do you measure character, right? That's very difficult to measure character. California has actually put it into their school reform plan, which is interesting. So we had this, we know research says that we learn by hearing. Students learn by hearing. But 90% of what we hear goes in one ear and out the other ear. Unless brain science will tell you, neurologically, there's got to be some kind of connection. Otherwise, it's gone. So we know that journaling, that's a way to go deeper in their psyche. So after we teach our curriculum, they then have this journaling portion where they're going to process 4 or 5 questions that correlate to what they just learned. We know that the third step, if you can verbalize and talk about what you just learned, when you start to communicate and you hear yourself speaking and hear others, your peers, talking about their ideas about how they're going to apply this, you start to catch on and glean from them. So the verbalizing, it's huge. The 4th step's the most important, though, if you want to transform, if you want a concept to transform you. And that is, you've got to take action. You've either got to teach it or you've got to act on it. And if you can act on it, the most powerful thing in the world happens. There's this cause and effect, right? If we're talking about the value of respect, and the challenge that we give them in the curriculum is, you need to write down the names of the 2 teachers that you least like. Write down why you least like them. Write down what you can do differently to interact with them. And then at the end of the day, it's write down a solution you're going to implement to try to gain their respect. So here's what happens. They do the challenge, and they actually sit in the front of the class. They put their head up. They change their posture. Or if they've been a real jerk, they read a letter of apology to the teacher. What happens then is powerful because they see the impact their own choices had on the response they're now getting from that teacher that they thought just hated them. They're seeing the changes. That's the most powerful thing in the world. It's no longer this external incentive, it's an internal incentive, because now I understand this value that was on the wall of my school now became real for me, and I understand this gives me real power. We call those challenge steps. So to this point in our organization, about 50% are doing these challenge steps, which isn't very good. We began to brainstorm and look at how do we get that to go up so that higher percentage of students are really living by these values and seeing that transformation. We came up with video. We said, let's do it by video. We saw some disconnections. There was a lack of, I guess, continuity from one school, from one classroom to the next, because everybody slices and dices the curriculum a little differently. And so we went to a video curriculum the next year, and we went to 85% of our students doing those challenges. At that point, we went back to a couple principals who for years had said, we see this incredible impact you're having in our after-school program students, but that's 15, 20% of the school building. How do we get this to permeate the entire school, 100% of our students? And for years we said, that's not our game, that's not what we do. Well, with this video curriculum, I went back to one of the principals and said, you need to take a look at this, because I think this could be really powerful for your student body. He said, let's test it. We did a training for the teachers, threw the videos at them, sat down with them at the end of the first semester, said, Seth, this is phenomenal. I said, what was phenomenal? He said, you understand we're a failing school. This is an Indiana school. They have a letter grade scale in Indiana. It's A through F. And they were a D school. Lots of behavioral issues, lots of discipline issues. Teachers can't focus. They can't instruct because there's so many disruptions. He said, Seth, we measured discipline referrals. We had a 3,000 decrease in discipline referrals in the first semester. I said, how? He said, well, we adopted your values. He said, but the values wasn't it. Our district values are very similar to your 5-star values. That wasn't it. The kicker was every Monday we implemented in our advisory period, we implemented your video curriculum. He said, as a result, everybody in the building, it gave us this common language. He said, Seth, you could step out in the hallway during passing period and talk to any one of our 630 students, and they could tell you what the value is we're talking about this week. They could tell you what they're doing for the challenge. He said, the result is the office is a lot less empty because the other added value is this teacher-student connection. Students are less likely to be a jerk to their teacher when they're building a relationship. They're less likely to be a jerk to their peer when they feel connected in community. There's this peer accountability. And so by the end of the school year, it was 5,000 less discipline referrals, and the principal was saying, Seth, we know that your focus of your organization has been the after-school space in this leadership training at your 300-acre property. He said, but you have another program here. So we ended up expanding our pilot to see what age range it worked with, and we found the sweet spot between 5th grade and 12th grade. And for the last 18 months, that's where most of our growth has come from, and it's been phenomenal. What it's become is a leadership platform. I'm fast forwarding to this Houston demographics. You want to look at the demos on it. Very diverse school. But basically, it's become a leadership platform where we train an administrator and another person in the school, a teacher, to run the program. They do a full leadership day training, go back to their school, and they train their faculty. Together, they work together with the faculty and the administration to select student leaders. Every school, whether it's a A-rated school or an F school, there are student leaders. There's student athletes, there's fine arts leaders, there's student government, National Honor Society in every single school. If you want to change a culture, you've got to start with what's existing. And ultimately, these existing leaders in those classrooms have been waiting for an opportunity to lead and a platform to do it. This happens to be a very easy and scalable platform to train these students. And then when we launch the program, they'll watch a 7 to 8 minute video, and they'll be assigned to 4 or 5 students for the semester. These leadership students, they'll be assigned 4 or 5 students. So it's creating this leadership platform where leaders can lead and they can influence their peers, helping them academically, helping them behaviorally. And ultimately, we've seen some great data. I'll come back to that. Just really quick, here's a school, Green Intermediate. This is a first-year school. Actually, this is fresh data. First, second quarter, a 21%. Actually, I just talked to her yesterday. It's actually at 30% decrease now from first quarter to second quarter in discipline referrals, which discipline referrals, if we talk about, when you talk to school administrators about culture, discipline referrals, behavior issues are driving teachers out of the business. They don't want to be teaching because it's just too much. This is significant. When there's less disruptions, teachers can do what they're made to do, and they do well. Schmucker Middle School, suburban school, 43%. This is a second-year school. So as schools implement it into the second and third year, the data gets more robust. 43% decrease in referrals. Laker Junior High School, which is in Senator Pavlov's district, 68% decrease in discipline referrals in the second year of implementation. They actually had a 75% decline in chronic truancy. That's students who have 10, they miss 10 days of school or more per semester. A 75% decrease. So again, there's a lot of research and a lot of studies about this. When you change the culture, when students buy into the values, there's a ripple effect across behavior, attendance, and academics. And that school also had like a 80% of the students raise their GPA or maintain a 3-point or above. So just some incredible data. 76% of teachers, this has been the amazing thing. 76% of teachers reported 5-Star Life video curriculum provided a platform to increase my connection with students. Basic education, everybody knows, when a student and a teacher connect, learning goes way up. That's simple education. 89% of teachers said 5-Star Life video curriculum provided a common set of values for students to live by.